Hello, everyone. My name is Kunal Chopra, and welcome to this webinar to take you to the inside world and the complexities of PFAS compliance, substitution, and supply chain control. As mentioned, my name is Kunal Chopra. I'm the CEO of Certivo, an AI-powered regulatory intelligence and supply chain collaboration platform specifically built for manufacturing companies. So whether you're leading regulatory strategy, ESG reporting, product development, today's masterclass is essentially for you. So without further ado, I think it's time to just get going and get started. So let's jump right in. In this session, we're going to cover a lot of the details of everything related to PFAS, given some reporting deadlines that are coming up very, very soon. So look at this session as really a masterclass for everything PFAS related. So you're ready when it comes to all your tracking, reporting, regulatory requirements. So let's start with the basics. What exactly are PFAS? As most of you know, PFAS stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. This is a large class, over 10,000 individual compounds, and they're all built around one core feature, an extremely strong carbon-fluorine bond. That bond makes them persistent in the environment. Essentially, PFAS don't degrade. They accumulate in soil, water, food chains, and in our bodies. These chemicals have been used widely for decades in firefighting foams, non-stick coatings, stain-resistant fabrics, lubricants, and electronics. Their utility is tied to that same durability, and that's what also makes them problematic from a regulatory and an environmental perspective. We'll go a lot more deeper in a moment, but this is the foundation. Essentially, PFAS are everywhere, and they just don't go away. So the question I think we should all be asking is now, why this pressure? Why are governments and institutions racing to regulate PFAS? Well, first, of course, there are health risks. Multiple peer-reviewed studies have linked PFAS exposure to testicular and kidney cancer, liver damage, thyroid disorders, developmental effects, and immune dysfunction. These aren't speculative correlations. The CDC, EPA, and the WHO have all weighed in. Second, environmental persistence. PFAS travel far. They bioaccumulate in wildlife. They show up in polar bear livers and Antarctic ice. This is not a local issue. It's a global issue. Third, litigation and liability. In the US alone, PFAS lawsuits have reached multi-billion-dollar settlements. 3M, DuPont, Chemours. These are no longer chemical industry stories. They're boardroom level discussions. And fourth, investor and consumer action. PFAS now appear in ESG risk assessments, shareholder resolutions, and product deselection. So the pressure is pretty systematic. The next question we should ask is, where are PFAS used? And the answer is almost everywhere. In electronics, they appear in semiconductors, thermal interface materials, dielectric coatings in medical devices. They're in catheter coatings and implantable seals. In aerospace, you'll find them in hydraulic fluids and fuel system parts. They're used in food packaging, textile treatments, lubricants, adhesives, paints, cleaning agents, and more. This slide essentially shows you the breadth, but the takeaway is this: even if your company doesn't make chemical products, you likely have PFAS exposure in your materials, components, or processes. And that's what makes compliance very tricky. And that's why tracking PFAS requires more than just a spreadsheet or an SDS. So let's talk regulation. There are four major mechanisms globally for how PFAS are being controlled. Number one, in the EU or the European Union, REACH is proposing a universal restriction. This would be the most comprehensive PFAS ban in history, covering over 10,000 substances with narrow exemptions. It's already in public consultation and could be enforced as early as 2025 or 2026. In the United States, you have the EPA, which is regulating PFAS under TSCA, the Toxic Substances Control Act. Under Section 8A7, companies must now report all manufactured or imported PFAS from 2011 onwards. Under SKIP, the EU's Substances of Concern and Products database, any article containing a candidate HVHC, including some PFAS, must be reported. And then you have the state level bans, California banning PFAS in cosmetics and textiles, Maine requiring declarations on any PFAS use, New York requiring PFAS in food packaging. So this is a rapidly shifting landscape, and a huge part of PFAS compliance is simply understanding which rules apply where. This visual shows the acceleration. You can see the inflection point around 2020 or so. That's when PFAS started moving from the scientific and NGO realm into actual legal restrictions. In 2020, PFOA was listed under the Stockholm Convention, banned internationally. In 2021, Maine passed its groundbreaking PFAS reporting law. In 2022, the EPA proposed sweeping TSCA reporting obligations. In 2023, the EU's Universal Restriction Proposal was published. By 2025 or 2026, enforcement is likely to begin in the EU. And by 2030, Maine intends to ban all PFAS in products, full stop. The point here isn't just the timeline, it's the compression. These shifts that once took decades are now moving in 24-month cycles. Companies that don't track this will be caught flat-footed. And not all PFAS regulations is created equal. Some rules, like California's, operate on a no-safe threshold principle. Any intentional use is banned, regardless of concentration. Others use parts per million or parts per billion threshold. SCIP requires reporting substances above 0.01 weight by weight. Drinking water regulations go as low as 10 to 20 parts per trillion. In the US, TSCA requires reporting of any PFAS manufactured or imported with no de minimis threshold. This variability makes PFAS compliance complex. You need to match the substance, the part, the market, and the applicable rule, and build your internal logic accordingly. So how do you detect PFAS? Well, there are several established methods. EPA 537.1 and EPA 533 are used for water, both drinking and non-potable, and target different PFAS chemistries. EPA 8327 is designed for adequate matrices like landfill leachate. ISO 25101 is an international standard for PFAS in water samples. But remember, PFAS analysis is expensive. Look, detection limits vary. Some labs can go to parts per trillion, others can't. And other methods like TOF, which is total organic fluorine, offer a way to estimate total PFAS load without identifying each molecule, but these methods aren't universally accepted. So knowing when and how to apply these methods and how to interpret results is also critical. Now, one of the biggest challenges in PFAS compliance is nomenclature. There are over 10,000 PFAS, and they go by hundreds of different aliases. Some are linear, some are branched, some are salts, some are precursors that degrade into banned PFAS. Gen X, for example, is the trade name. The CAS number is 13252-13-6, but you might also see it listed by its IUPAC name or its functional group. This means SDSs often don't list the PFAS clearly. That's why CAS-based validation is so important. Your systems need to map aliases to CAS numbers and flag functional equivalence when CAS isn't listed. How often do PFAS enter your supply chain? Well, there are three main pathways. Intentional use, PFAS is added directly to coatings, sealants, or treatments. Number two, residual presence. Trace PFAS from upstream ingredients that are not listed explicitly. Number three, contamination, especially through recycled content or shared manufacturing equipment. This chart that you see here shows how PFAS can move from raw chemical to sub-assembly to finished product. And critically, each of these steps may involve a different supplier in a different geography with a different disclosure requirement. That's why traceability becomes so hard and why a spreadsheet just won't cut it. So let's close this section by grounding in operational reality. Tracking PFAS across a global supply chain is hard because BOMs often don't go deep enough. PFAS may exist 3 or 4 levels down. Suppliers are reluctant to share full formulations, especially if they consider it proprietary. Regulatory knowledge varies dramatically by region and company size. There's no standardized declaration format that works globally. So this is why so many compliance teams feel stuck. Their data isn't structured, the suppliers aren't trained, the tools aren't built for substance level traceability. That's why we are here to change. That's what we are here to change. And in the next section, we'll explore exactly how to operationalize, PFAS compliance. Once you start operationalizing PFAS compliance, you'll quickly realize that not all documentation is created equal. At the top of the hierarchy is the full material declaration, or what we call the FMD. This is the gold standard. It lists every substance in the part or material above a set threshold, usually 0.10%, 0.1% by weight. Next, you have safety data sheets, SDSs. These are often the default source of chemical info, but they're insufficient for PFAS. SDSs usually only list hazardous substances above 1%, and most PFAS fly under the radar. You also have supplier declaration letters. They are legally binding attestations. For example, it might say things like this product does not contain any PFAS listed under REACH, but they depend entirely on supplier honesty and capability. Finally, there's lab testing. It's expensive and limited, but sometimes it's the only way to verify high risk parts. In practice, you'll use all four. Knowing when to use which is part of the operational challenge. When reviewing supplier declarations, names aren't enough. You need CAS numbers. Why? Because PFAS are often listed under trade names, aliases, or acronyms, and regulators enforce based on CAS registry numbers. So, for example, GenX, a PFAS used as a replacement for PFOA, has the CAS number of 132 5213-6. If a supplier says no Gen X used, but the declaration lists 13252-13-6, you're caught in a contradiction. So use a crosswalk, match aliases to CAS numbers using databases like EPA, COMTOX, or the OECD PFAS list, and always validate against official regulatory lists, not just what the supplier claims. This step is what separates the checkbox compliance from real risk management. To track PFAS risk, you also need to explore the BOM, not just look for top-level assemblies. Let's say you're reviewing a gasket. The base material may be compliant, but the adhesive layer contains a fluorinated primer, and that primer contains PTFE or a PFAS processing aid. That primer might come from a tier 2 or a tier 3 supplier. Your direct supplier may not even know it's there. So you need multi-tier BOM compositions, break the part into its subcomponents, map those into a responsible supplier, and verify declarations at each level. Think of this as vertical compliance, not just horizontal supply chain mapping. To prioritize your efforts, you need some sort of a PFAS risk scoring system for your parts. You can score based on material class, coatings, adhesives, fluoropolymers get higher risk scores, supplier location, countries with weaker disclosure laws mean higher risk, response history. If a supplier has failed to provide declarations before, that's a red flag. Assign a score, say 1 to 5, triage your BOM accordingly, focus on the top 20% of parts that represent 80% of your risk exposure, and this lets you kind of scale your compliance without drowning in low risk parts. Here's a nuance many overlook. Not all compliance is regulatory. So many PFAS restrictions are coming from your customers, not from governments. Apple, Dell, HP, and medtech OEMs are rolling out PFAS-free requirements. These are contractual, not legislative, but they are just as binding if you want to keep that business. At the same time, some manufacturers are adopting internal policies banning all intentionally added PFAS by 2026, for example, to meet ESG targets to reduce liability. So your PFAS program needs to track not only regulatory thresholds, but also customer-specific declarations. Often the latter is stickier. Let's talk execution. Supplier outreach is where most PFAS programs stall. You can't send one-off emails. You need a structured campaign. Start by segmenting your suppliers by part type, risk tier, geography, and regulatory exposure. Then send standardized requests translated if needed with clear instructions. Which PFAS are you asking about, what format you need them, and what thresholds apply. Track every response, record who responded, when, and what documentation they provided. This transforms a chaotic inbox into a repeatable, auditable workflow. Not every supplier will respond. I think if you're in compliance, you probably know this, and some will delay endlessly. So you need escalation protocols. For example, after 14 days, send a reminder. After 30 days, escalate your sourcing lead or legal contact. After 45 days, flag the part as non-compliant by omission and begin exploring substitution or second sourcing. Keep a record of all attempts. This becomes critical if you're ever audited or challenged. It shows that you exercise due diligence. And even if a supplier failed to cooperate, regulators don't expect perfection, but they do expect process. Let's break down the three main types of supplier declarations. Number one, a negative declaration. The supplier affirms that no PFAS above a threshold are present. This is the most useful for compliance and customer reporting. A positive declaration. The supplier lists the exact PFAS present with CAS numbers and concentrations rare but powerful. A conditional declaration. The supplier says PFAS are present but below threshold or exempted. You'll get these in PDFs, Excel sheets, portal forms, or maybe even XML. Standardize these formats as much as you can. Create templates and validate every field before storing. You should build a matrix, a regulatory risk map of sorts, matching each product category with applicable PFAS rules. For example, a PTFE coated wire sold in Germany must meet SCIP's 0.1% threshold. That same part sold in California may be banned outright. In the US under TSCA, it might be reported if imported, regardless of quantity. By laying out product categories against jurisdictions and rule types, you create a decision matrix for your compliance team, helping them answer the question, is this part compliant for this market? This becomes a cornerstone of sustainable compliance. PFAS compliance, as you can imagine, is not a solo sport. You need a cross-functional task force, ideally putting regulatory, legal, product, and sourcing all together. Assign roles. Regulatory reads the risk logic, legal vets the declaration, engineering handles substitution planning, sourcing enforces disclosure and supplier contracts. Use dashboards to assign ownership and deadlines, build SOPs around declaration collection, validation, and escalation. So this ensures you're not firefighting, you're running a mature compliance operation. When PFAS are flagged, the next step isn't always compliance, it's substitution. You can't, swap blindly. So you need a structured alternatives assessment. There are several frameworks to guide this. The EPA's Safer Choice, the OECD's Substitution Principles, and Green Screen for Safer Chemicals. These frameworks all ask three key questions. Is the alternative functionally equivalent? Is it technically and economically feasible? Does it actually reduce hazard or just shift risk, elsewhere? A well-run substitution effort avoids regrettable replacements, ensures long-term regulatory alignment. One important regulatory principle that's emerging, especially in Europe, is essential use. The idea is simple. PFAS should only be allowed if they're critical for health, safety, or functioning society, and if no alternatives exist. Under REACH, this concept is already being used to grant or deny PFAS derogations. So if a manufacturer or if you manufacture a part with PFAS, you need to ask, is this essential? And can I justify that with evidence? If not, you'll likely face a restriction, whether from regulators or from customers. This is a powerful tool for triage, applied early to prioritize which parts must be redesigned. To run substitution at scale, you'll need a structured evaluation tool. A substitution matrix lets you compare PFAS-containing parts and candidate alternatives across multiple dimensions: original material and its function, regulatory risk and time to ban, known PFAS identity and concentration, or alternatives performance, cost, and availability. Use multi-criteria decision analysis, MCDA, to score trade-offs and surface the best options. Document this analysis is essential for both engineering teams and auditors. One of the most overlooked parts of PFAS compliance is a design collaboration. Compliance often catches issues late, other parts are released or sourced. Flip that. Embed PFAS logic into the design phase. Work with engineers to build constraint libraries, flag high-risk materials like PTFE, any fluorinated polymers, and again, all this happening at design time. Involve them in the substitution decisions and give them performance trade-offs in a language that they understand. Compliance is more effective when it's preventive, when it's not corrective. As you assess your product portfolio, start building a substitution watch list. This is a list of parts that are known or suspected to contain PFAS, have alternatives already used in other parts of your org or industry, are not yet banned, but likely will be at some point of time. Assign each part to a substitution lead, track feasibility, test results, and design timeline. This turns a substitution from an ad hoc scramble into a managed project pipeline. Be careful, though, that not every substitution is a solution. One major risk is a regrettable substitution, replacing one PFAS with another or with a compound that poses similar or worse risks. For example, replacing PFOA with GenX. GenX is under scrutiny and may soon be banned in many markets. So screen every alternative for persistence. Ask the question, does it degrade? The bioaccumulation, ask the question, does it build up in organisms? Toxicity, what are the health impacts? Use tools like green screen, GHS classification, and reach hazard codes. Avoid short-term fixes that create long-term problems. To stay compliant and defend your position, you'll need an internal audit program for PFAS. Conduct audits annually or every 6 months in high-risk industries. Key audit points: percentage of suppliers with valid declarations, percentage of PFAS containing parts with risk scores or substitution plans, data completeness. Do you have document trails, timestamps, version controls, escalation? How are you handling non-responsive suppliers? Treat PFAS like financial risk. Audit for it, track progress, and report gaps. If you're ever challenged by a regulator, customer, or even in court, you'll need to show your work. This is called building a defensible compliance position. You must be able to demonstrate where your data came from, how declarations were validated, who was contacted and when, how decisions like exemptions or substitutions were made. This is where systems and audit trails matter. If you have a documentation, timestamps, and a clear process, you're protected. If not, you're exposed. Let's shift to external scrutiny. Regulators and customers may request proof, especially under REACH, TSCA, or SCIP. Be ready to provide a PFAS data pack, list of PFAS exposed parts, declarations and their sources, evidence of due diligence on non-responses, testing reports where relevant. Tag each part with a compliance status, confirmed, pending, or unknown. Make this pack reproducible. so that at any time you can export and submit without a fire drill. Finally, you need to report upward, not just outward. Executives want dashboards, total exposure, substitution progress, and regulatory timelines. Regulators want structured data, CAS numbers, thresholds, and timestamps. Customers may want declarations in XML, Excel, or PDFs. Build a reporting layer that serves all three audiences. And remember, the goal isn't to be perfect. It's to be prepared, proactive, and provable. To stay ahead of PFAS regulations, you also need a policy forecasting capability, not just passive tracking. Start by monitoring regulatory consultations like the ECHA's public consultation calendar or EPA dockets. These show where restrictions are being debated before they're finalized. Watch NGO activity groups like ChemSec, HPN, and Client Earth often predict regulatory shifts years ahead. Their watch lists signal which substances are gaining attention. Also follow industry associations. When major players begin voluntary phase outs, regulation is usually next. Finally, track scientific committee outputs like RAC and SEAC in the EU. These bodies often foreshadow bans with toxicology assessments. All of this becomes your early warning system so you can act before these rules are finalized. Forecasting isn't just research, it's structure. Build a regulatory change radar, a dashboard or tracker that monitors draft laws, proposed regulations, scientific assessments, NGO campaigns, industry self-regulation. Assign each item a stage, something like draft, proposed, adopted, enforced. Update this regularly and use it to drive decisions like substitution prioritization or market access planning. This radar makes regulatory change tangible and keeps your team proactive instead of reactive. One of the most frustrating realities of PFAS regulation is inconsistency. Take this example. In the EU, a PFAS might be permitted in industrial use under REACH, but that same substance might be banned in California. If it's used in consumer products. The US EPA might allow it, but Maine or New York may not. TSCA might require reporting, even if REACH allows exemptions. So this creates conflicts. And so if you sell globally, your compliance status depends on the geography you use and product category. That's why we recommend building a jurisdictional decision tree for each part of product mapping, the intersection rules that apply. You want to do that sort of mapping. Here's a reference table that can help anchor your jurisdictional mapping. The US TSCA list includes over 180 PFAS and requires reporting with no de minimis threshold. The EU REACH candidate list includes 11 PFAS currently, and more are under review. Canada's SEPA is considering a class-based restriction. In Asia, countries like Japan and China are increasing scrutiny, but disclosure requirements are limited. When building a PFAS compliance system, you must tag substances by jurisdiction and know when a substance is regulated or reportable, exempted, or unrestricted. Not all PFAS are listed and not all PFAS are known. Many new PFAS chemistries like cyclic structure or ultra short chains don't show up on any official lists yet, but they're functionally equivalent and regulators are catching on. Your strategy should be track the OECD global PFAS list. It includes over 4,700 substances, including precursors. Require suppliers to disclose based on function or structure, not just gas numbers. Treat emerging analogs with the same caution as listed substances. This helps you future-proof your compliance and avoid being blindsided by the next wave of restrictions. Let's talk about speed. Traditionally, regulations followed the cycle: hazard, risk, consultation, regulation, enforcement. This could take 8 to 10 years. But for PFAS, we're seeing timeline compression. authorities are moving from evaluation to restriction in under 36 months. Some jurisdictions are skipping these risk phases altogether, regulating based on hazard alone and applying the essential use doctrine by default. This means you need to build lead time buffers, at least 6 to 12 months, into your design cycles, sourcing decisions, and market launches. Waiting until a rule is enforced will put you behind. Complexity needs visualization. We recommend building two types of heat maps. One, a world map showing PFAS regulatory status by country. Use red, yellow, green to indicate banned, proposed, or unregulated. A product exposure matrix showing which product categories are impacted by which regional laws. These heat maps are powerful for internal communication, whether you're briefing engineering, legal, or your board of directors. You can even go further and actually model exposure risk in your data systems. Assign a PFAS risk score to each part or material using weighted criteria. Materials class, example, fluoropolymer equal to high risk. Supplier disclosure status, something like complete, partial, missing. A usage context, a food, contact, medical device, industrial. This score helps you prioritize supplier outreach, focus testing budgets, sequence substitution efforts, and it turns compliance into data-driven decision making. PFAS should not be siloed. Often PFAS coexist with other regulated substances, REACH, HVACs, ROHS, restricted metals, Proposition 65, carcinogens. Your substance tracking system must be unified. One substance table, one BOM validation logic, one supplier declaration workflow. Use metadata tagging to group substances by hazard class, jurisdiction, and functional category. This creates a system that scales not just for PFAS, but for all chemical compliance challenges. Finally, be honest about uncertainty. PFAS regulation is fluid, enforcement varies, new substances are emerging, thresholds shift. You won't always have perfect data, but you can communicate probability and confidence. Use traffic light models. Red, confirmed PFAS presence. Yellow, suspected or below threshold. Green, no PFAS with validated declaration. Provide clear context, use qualifiers, and equip business teams to act on imperfect data responsibly and transparently. That's what leadership looks like in a dynamic compliance environment. To manage PFAS long-term, you need a scalable system, not a one-time solution. Start with modular architecture. Your platform must evolve as new substances, geographies, and threshold rules emerge. Balance automation with judgment, regulatory nuance, like interpreting exemptions that require human-in-the-loop workflows. Ensure interoperability with your existing tech stack, examples, your ERP, your PLM, your KMS systems. Finally, encode rules as data, not hard-coded logic. This lets you update policy without breaking workflows. Sustainable compliance is adapted by design. The core of your PFAS program is in the data. As you can imagine, you need a data model that can tag substances at the CAS number level and include all the aliases. Track document provenance, where a declaration was received, from whom, and under what terms. Map relationships across multi-unit BOMs from coatings to subcomponents. Overlay jurisdictional exposure and risk scores dynamically. And the ingestion pipeline must normalize your SDSs, FMDs, declaration letters, and lab reports into a unified format. You're not just collecting documents, you're building structured evidence. PFAS isn't just a compliance issue, it's also an ESG disclosure issue. Under CSRD, companies must report environmental risks and financial exposures. PFAS fits both. It affects Scope 3 emissions, product design, and brand trust. By tracking PFAS exposure and substitution, you contribute to safer product design, chemical footprinting, ESG, and sustainability metrics. So this gives your compliance work a strategic home and aligns it with investor expectations. PFAS isn't the first time we have faced regulatory complexity. REACH HVACs taught us that full declarations matter more than SDSs. ROHS showed that compliance must start in design, not expectation. Conflict Minerals built the template for supplier attestation workflows. take these lessons, go deeper. The PFAS spans more substances, more jurisdictions, and more political risk, but the tools already exist and they work if they're adapted correctly. Compliance is also not a solo sport. You need a whole organization aligned, provide role-specific training. Engineers need to understand material restrictions and substitution. Procurement needs to enforce declarations in contracts and RFQs. Legal needs to vet supplier attestations for sufficiency and liability risk. Also create a shared PFAS reference hub with FAQs, substance lists, and template documents. Make it easy for teams to find answers and to act responsibly. As you all know, what gets measured gets managed. Establish PFAS KPIs, just like you would for financial safety or sustainability targets. Examples include percentage of suppliers with valid declarations, percentage of flagged parts with substitution plans, average response time of justified exemptions mapped. Use these KPIs in your quarterly business reviews, tie them to procurement and product goals, make PFAS progress visible and accountable. So let's walk through a very structured use case end to end. For example, you might start with a BOM of 10,000 parts, 200 suppliers. You tag 180 parts as PFAS risk due to their materials, mostly coatings and adhesives. You launch a supplier declaration campaign in 2 weeks, 70% respond. You validate, score, and you store those responses. You flag 20 parts for substitution based on upcoming EU enforcement. This is what good PFAS compliance looks like: proactive, documented, and measurable. If you're building a multi-year PFAS strategy, structure it in 3 phases. Phase 1, 0 to 6 months, map your exposure, launch declarations, identify your high-risk parts. Phase 2, possibly 6 to 18 months, collaborate with engineering, begin substitution and testing, update your BOM libraries. Phase 3, 12 to 24 months, integrate into ESG reporting, finalize policy alignment, check in, clean up with outliers, align this roadmap with budgeting cycles and NPI pipelines. The goal isn't just compliance, like I said, it's building resilience. And for anyone who wants to go, deeper into some key resources, here are some. The OECD's global PFAS list, the most comprehensive substance group reference, the EPA ComTox dashboard, great for CAS lookups and regulatory cross-references, ECHA's restriction portal, especially for following REACH progress, ChemSec's SIN list for seeing where NGO pressure is headed, and finally, sample templates for FMDs and declarations, which you can adapt internally. Bookmark these. These are essentially your toolkit. So here are some final takeaways. Let's close with a few truths. PFAS isn't just a list of banned chemicals. It's a systematic supply chain challenge. It touches procurement, engineering, legal, sustainability, and risk. But if you build the workflow now, the documentation, the substitution planning, the regulatory radar, you'll be prepared not just for PFAS, but for what's next. Because the playbook we've discussed, it works for any emerging chemical regime. Start small, move fast, and lead from compliance. So with that being said, I really want to thank you all for joining us today. If you ever need some help with your PFAS workflows, your PFAS program, I'd encourage you to check out Certivo.com. You can email me directly at Kunal, Kunal, @Certivo.com as well. I'll have all that information available from where you're accessing this webinar. And then let's set up a call. Let's discuss your PFAS program and how Certivo might be able to help. So thank you again for your time. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope this webinar was useful to all of you. I appreciate it. Thank you.